Welcome to the RF Berlin Forum on Migration. My name is Tim Phillips. A group of researchers have been meeting here in Germany's capital to discuss their research on this important and contentious topic. And I've been talking to some of those experts. Forced migration has displaced millions of people globally. In Europe, we have witnessed at first hand the plight of Ukrainians who were forced to flee to other European countries. The challenges they face are typical of the daily struggle of refugees from conflict in many other countries. One of the most important decisions that policymakers and refugees themselves must make is whether to stay and assimilate in the host country or return. If refugees stay, how can we help them to build a sustainable life? And if they return, how can we ensure that they will be safe? Panu Poutvaara, Director of the IFO Center for Migration and Development Economics, and Damla Buyuktaskin, Senior Livelihood and Economic Inclusion Officer at the United Nations High Commission for Refugees Asia Pacific Regional Bureau, are experts in this field. Panu, welcome.
Thank you.
And Damla as well.
Thank you very much, Tim.
Panu, I'm going to talk to you about your research for forced migrants from Ukraine. In Europe, how many of them are there at the moment?
There are currently more than 6 million Ukrainians in other European countries.
That is a lot. Where are they?
Germany is currently the biggest host country with about 1.5 million, and Poland has about 1 million Ukrainian refugees.
And what is the status of these refugees?
The European Union activated already at the early stages of war in March 2022 temporary protection guidelines, which means that Ukrainian refugees get automatically protection status in the European Union member states of their choice.
Now, we're discussing that decision to stay or to return, why refugees would choose either, what impact that has on host countries and on themselves. So we don't know how Ukrainian conflict is going to be resolved at time of recording. But if they were to return, what value would that have for Ukraine?
Ukraine, like other European countries, faces severe demographic challenges, and refugees are, of course, needed to rebuild Ukraine and to help Ukraine to prosper again, and also to make Ukraine safe again.
And if they were to stay, I guess Germany could have some benefit from these refugees as well?
Yes, so from a narrow economic perspective of host country economies, if especially young and working age refugees would stay, then they would help to alleviate demographic challenges. But of course, European countries also need to take wider European perspective, and from European also security perspective, we should help and encourage Ukrainian refugees to rebuild Ukraine.
Yes, you talk about challenges, and anyone who's been watching or listening to the news will know that this is a hot topic in many European countries, particularly Germany, where we are now. What do people in the host countries, what concerns do they have?
I would say that when it comes to, in general, Ukrainian refugees, they have been broadly, warmly welcomed in Europe. Over time, I think that the main concerns people have are related to, in some countries, relatively low rate of labor force participation, and feeling that many Ukrainian refugees are a burden to the public finances because they need social assistance.
Very often, the voices that we don't hear in all of this are the refugees themselves. So, credit to you. You have done research into Ukrainian refugees in Europe. How did you do this research? How did you find them? What access did you have? And how did you find their opinions?
We paid to a survey company that was then paying to Meta to put out ads on Facebook. And the criterion was that they targeted people who had been living in Ukraine according to their IP address before the full-scale Russian attack and they're subsequently located in other European countries. And if they filled these criteria, they were then shown an invitation to participate in our survey. And if they clicked the link, then they were took to the survey website. And at the end of the survey, they were asked if they are willing to be recontacted again and provided the email address if they agreed to that.
And did you manage to find a large number of refugees for this?
In the first survey, we had almost 12,000 respondents, of whom about one half agreed to be recontacted again. And of those who agreed to be recontacted, then about one half have stayed in the panel.
So broadly speaking, what is the return intention of the refugees in your sample? Do most people want to go back to Ukraine?
At the beginning, it was clear majority that wanted to go back.
18-year-old Julia is one recent arrival.
I want to study in Poland.
She's learning Polish, but she plans to return to Ukraine as soon as the war ends.
Because it's our country, it's our home, and we want to return.
About 10% said that they don't plan to return at all. That rate has increased somewhat so that at the end of the last year, about 1/4 plan to settle permanently outside of Ukraine. About half have either already returned or plan to return.
Queues of people waiting to return home.
Of course, must make sure that our grandma and grandpa, it's okay, because they cannot to change country. They have high age.
I'm going home to Kiev because my husband is there and he is about to go to army, and I want to say goodbye.
Now, we're talking about Ukraine as if it is just one homogenous place, but of course different regions in Ukraine are differently affected by the conflict. Does this make a big difference in the attitudes of refugees from Ukraine, where they would be returning to?
Definitely. So people do not want to return to occupied territories and people do not want to return to areas which are uninhabitable because of the Russian aggression.
Well, yes.
What we do see is that those people who initially planned to return and want to return, even if there is fighting in their home region, they are still often returning, but then returning to other parts in Ukraine.
I see. And does the experience of living in a host country, the treatment they have had, the level of acceptance that they feel they've had in the host country, does that make a difference to their intention to return?
That's an excellent question that I'm not able to answer at the moment. So that is something that I don't know yet.
Of course, it is not exclusively Ukrainian refugees in Europe. We have had several waves of refugees in the last 10, 15 years. We've seen refugees from Afghanistan, from Iraq, from Syria. The story that we hear from Ukrainian refugees, is that broadly similar to the experiences, the opinions of these earlier waves of refugees?
One very big difference is that Ukrainian refugees had already at the beginning much higher return intentions.
Right, yes.
And vast majority of Ukrainian refugees plan to return. In Germany, there have been surveys which have asked previous refugees on their plans to return, and then 90% or more say that they plan to stay in Germany. So it's almost the opposite from Ukrainian refugees.
Damla, let me bring you in because you are responsible for helping refugees, but in a different region of the world. Tell me about that. Tell me about your role and what you do.
I'm the Senior Livelihood and Economic Inclusion Officer for Asia-Pacific countries. It means that we are in charge of 45 countries of Asia and the Pacific from the hub that manages all of these operations. Mm-hmm. So it's the countries that start from Kazakhstan down until the Pacific Islands as well. Of course, the situations that keep us very busy are especially Afghanistan, Pakistan and Iran, and Bangladesh and Myanmar, where most of the refugees come from. And in Afghanistan and Myanmar, we also have the internally displaced populations. It means that they are not refugees, they're inside their countries, but they have to move because of conflict. And then we have the stateless population. So overall in the world, we have around 5 million people without any nationality, and half of it is in Asia and the Pacific. Therefore, those are the people that we serve. And accordingly, I'm in charge of the programs for rendering them self-reliant, so to say. So we work on skills building, technical vocational training, entrepreneurship, language, private sector partnerships, and social protection programs as well in all of those countries. And of course, facilitation of employment and having a systemic approach, starting from vocational training up until their inclusion into the social protection systems is our ultimate objective. But that doesn't happen always because the legal framework does not allow us to start with. Many of the countries in the region are not signatories to the 1951 Convention, unfortunately, and they don't also have their national asylum laws. So it means that there is no legal framework for the refugees to work in those countries. For example, in Bangladesh, in Cox's Bazar refugee camps, we have around 1 million Rohingya.
In reality, it's a scorched earth policy that's driving tens of thousands of Rohingya from their homes. Now they're on the run, stateless and friendless and scared.
Who are not allowed to leave the camps and who are not allowed to work. They're allowed to work on the Bashanchar Island, and they're allowed to engage in some economic activity as well. So it's our job to keep them busy, but in a meaningful manner, and then to also help them to generate some sort of income while acquiring new skills as well.
One of the very interesting aspects of Panu's research was just how much of a commitment there is to return in the right circumstances. You are dealing with places where seems to be much less structure, and it would still be very dangerous for many people to return. Do you still find amongst those refugee populations a desire to get back to their old life?
Very interesting question again, because of course we carry out those intention surveys as well. So we ask people, and then while they want to return, then we try to support them while they are returning. And for us in UNHCR, we really try to find permanent solutions to the challenges that they have. So the very first one is if peace is established in the home country, we really would love them to go back to their old lives and rebuild their countries, if that's possible, of course. The second one is to be socioeconomically included in the host country so that they can become socioeconomically contributing members to that society. Refugees come to those countries with their skills, with their diplomas, with their experiences. And if they don't have any of these, they come with the determination to rebuild their lives, actually. And they can also become consumers if they can access the right opportunities. That is to say, really contribute to the economy of the host country. And then the third permanent solution for us is resettlement. It means they can be resettled to the countries where they would like to receive refugees. And fourth one we can talk about now is actually under the resettlement category, which is complementary pathways we refer to. It means it's skilled migration, but it's similar to resettlement as well. So refugees are being accepted by countries based on skills, whereas resettlement is not based on skills. It's based on family reunification and vulnerability criteria. However, complementary pathways refers to labor market gaps in that particular country, like Canada, where they accept refugees, and we support them with vocational training and facilitating those movements as well.
You have to work with governments. You can't tell them what to do, even though I imagine sometimes you would probably quite like to. If you want to make it possible, practical for refugees to return to their country, are there a hard set of conditions that have to be satisfied for you to help them to go back? Or is every situation different?
Every situation is basically different. And of course, my colleagues are much better placed to answer to your question, actually, because of course, there are really protection colleagues that look at those conditions and also advise accordingly. In relation to what you have stated related to the governments, I would sometimes like to very kindly request them just to let the refugees work. I'm Turkish by nationality, and I had the opportunity to witness that whole process, where government of Turkey has accepted the Syrian refugees and accordingly, of course, eventually granted them the right to work. They really have to find a job still and access work permits, but it's a very straightforward and easy process where they can also access social protection systems. And why did Turkey do this? Because they had a look and thought, okay, we're already spending money on health, education, It's better to let them work so that they can contribute back to the social protection systems. If they would be allowed to work in Asia as well, they could just work, pay their taxes, contribute to the social insurance system, just like everybody else. And then health and education of that country would also be really paid from that big pot of social protection as well. And it's usually my job, together with my colleagues, to find the why, because it's not easy to say, oh, they're vulnerable, please let them work. But we really have to find that particular reason why it's actually good for the country to let the refugees work as well.
There is a development challenge for a lot of countries in finding enough work for people who live there already. A lot of these countries are very young. A lot of these countries do not have very large formal labour markets. I would imagine that sometimes then finding work for a large population of refugees, well, that must be quite difficult if we were going to rely on the existing labour market.
But also at the end of the day, of course, we need a very well-functioning private sector and labour markets that can include everyone. We don't only work with refugees, but we also work for the members of the host community because we want everybody to access the same opportunities. We want everybody to have jobs, to have income, and to live in social cohesion. That really happens when they earn together, when they learn together. Therefore, we would like everyone to access these opportunities. And that is why UNHCR does not only work with refugees, but also supports the host community as well. We understand that populations are huge, but also if you can really render these people and make them entrepreneurs, they can become exporters, they can become innovators, they can become employers, they can become taxpayers, because it's just a matter of really accessing the right opportunities. That's why we run programs also on self-employment. I'm fascinated by entrepreneurship myself. I started my career as an entrepreneur, actually, and transformed that into development knowledge. So we provide them with training in order to become entrepreneurs, but then we also give them grants in order to sustain their businesses and be able to start it. Because, of course, you need a good business idea, but you also need really assets and some grants, some, of course, money to be able to set up that business and sustain it. And then it brings me to the idea of course, financial inclusion. Because if you cannot open bank accounts, if you cannot access financial services, it's not possible to really start a business and sustain it as well. So this challenge is multi-layered, but we're working really on many levels with many stakeholders with the whole of society approach.
Panu, from what Damla's saying there, in a very different situation, how much of that is resonant with what is happening with Ukrainian refugees and how they feel about their stay in their host countries?
Importantly, the European Union gave Ukrainian refugees immediately a right to work and access to social protection. So that problem has been addressed, but there are still many challenges when it comes to finding jobs, so that even if there are legal rights to find a job, there are still challenges in finding jobs. Language is often one big challenge, especially in countries like Germany.
Damla, we hear so much bad news in the media about the status of refugees and their life stories and their futures, and it sometimes seems hopeless. What are the examples of programs that have succeeded that we can take positive messages from?
Well, in my line of work, I can't be hopeless. And even when there is no right to work, we never stop. Of course, we work on advocacy. We work with the governments. We work with the private sector to try to persuade and convince the governments to let them work. And I believe in every situation, there's always something that can be done. And that is why we need to know the how and the why of how we should proceed in those cases as well. We have many programs that work, and it's very much dependent on the context. So when there is a vibrant private sector labor market and there is the possibility to work, we have a different approach. For example, like in Philippines, like in Japan, like in Korea, where you need to just facilitate with the right actors for employment and for setting up their businesses. But in the case of Bangladesh, where they're not allowed to go out, we have partnerships with big brands like Uniqlo, where we have to create a parallel universe and have state-of-the-art apparel workshops inside the camps where they do volunteering, manufacture for themselves, rebuild their skills and generate income. Therefore, especially in Asia, all situations are different and we have to have really tailor-made solutions. I have seen so many solutions that actually work, and everybody's seeing the benefits that having refugees will bring as well. Because, of course, they really come with the determination to rebuild their lives. I've never seen anyone say to me ever, oh, I need to be dependent on aid. They say, let me work, let me contribute, let me have my own money, let my children be educated. We need, of course, the governments. We really collaborate with the private sector, global brands, but also national small and medium enterprises, umbrella organizations. We work with non-governmental organizations, and we work with academia as well in order to come up with the how and to move forward together towards solutions as well.
So a final question for both of you. The political weather has changed. How concerned are you that the hopes, the aspirations that you have found in refugees might not be possible to be realised just because there is a lack of generosity from host countries?
I think that when it comes to Ukrainian refugees, the big question is what happens in the war, and that is my fears are rather than on the side what happens in the host countries.
That question is way above my pay grade, I must say. So I'm a technician who really has a look at labor market gaps, carries out all of these programs, and has a look at what is possible. Therefore, I leave it to other people to have a look at those contexts. But what we do is really what is possible, and we move forward accordingly.
Well, thank you very much for talking about it today. Thank you, Panu.
Thank you.
And Damla.
Thank you very much, Tim.
If you want to read Panu's research, it is called The Effect of Conflict on Ukrainian Refugees' Return Intentions and Integration Outcomes. And the authors are Joop Adema, Shevat Aksoy, Yvonne Giesing, and Panu Poutvaara. And to learn more about the programs that Damla has described, go to www.unhcr.org.
Thanks for listening. The Rockwool Foundation Berlin Institute for the Economy and the Future of Work is providing new knowledge to inform public debate and to create the best possible basis for policy making. Find out more at rfberlin.com.